Hello everybody, this is David Farrell with another music theory video. Today's video talks about some larger formal structures, talking about Rondo form and Sonata form. We've done videos on small scale form in the past, talking about phrases, periods, and sentences, some structures that occur over just a couple measures. We've talked about some of the smaller forms like binary and ternary forms, which we can see in varying scales in different pieces of music. Now we talk about Rondo and Sonata forms, two forms that we tend to find in more expansive movements in Western common practice music. In this video, we're going to have an overview of these two things. They're both large topics and they both require looking at lots of music to get a full understanding, so our goal is just to introduce the basics for each of them. Let's start by talking about Rondo form. Rondo form is perhaps most similar to ternary form, ABA form, a form that we've discussed in the past. Rondo form is a multi-section form that features returning material and contrasting sections. Just like our ternary form, where we have an initial section that has particular musical qualities, we have a contrasting B section, which tends to have a harmonic and motivic departure, and then a return in our returning A section. Rondo form does some similar things. The difference, the way that rondo is different from ternary form, is by the larger amount of both the returning and contrasting sections. In a ternary form, we have one contrasting section, and then we have a return of the initial material, and that's that. We're finished with our piece of music. A rondo form is characterized by a continuous alternation of contrasting sections and returns to our main section. We can look at this using our letters to denote different sections of music. A common version of rondo form would be organized A, an initial idea, B, a contrasting section, A, a return to the initial idea, C, another contrasting section, and then another final return to A. Rondo forms are found frequently as the final movement of multi-movement works, like symphonies or instrumental sonatas, but we can find them in other places too, freestanding rondos or in other sections of music, and so it's a form that we will find with some frequency. The number one characteristic, again, of our rondo form is the idea of return, the idea of consistently and frequently returning to our opening idea. That's the hallmark, that's the signature of a rondo form. What should we be expecting to see then in these different sections of a rondo form? Returns to our A section in rondo form are typically pretty clear. Most rondo forms do not have a goal of deceiving you or tricking you when the A section comes back. Most rondo forms want you to be able to recognize that return of the A section. And so these returns are often in the tonic key. And even when they're not, they feature repeats of thematic material, typically with very minimal variation. In other words, the initial melody, the initial motive of our A section tends to come back with very, very few alterations. We tend to hear that theme, that main theme of a rondo, very clearly every time the A section comes back. The other sections in the rondo almost always feature distinct motivic contrast. For that melodic return to be successful, the other sections have to have their own motivic identity, so it doesn't seem like we have the same melody going on throughout the entire piece. Our B section, our C section, our D section, whatever other sections we have, will typically have motives that vary quite a bit from our initial A, so that there's no chance we mix up which section we're in. Frequently, the other sections will also use new keys as well. New harmonic centers will be featured in these other sections. And so sections that feature clear motivic and harmonic contrast are pretty typical of our rondo form, and when those A's come back, really clear returns, which is quite useful for us as listeners and as analysts. Some common organizations of rondo form. ABACA is what I cited in my first slide. This is a very common arrangement. In a form like this, each A is typically in the tonic key. The B and C sections typically in different contrasting keys. The dominant, the relative major and minor are frequent targets, though more chromatic rondos might modulate to more distant harmonic areas. There are other ways we can organize a rondo form as well, though. ABACA is certainly not the only way. Any section that features frequent returns can qualify as a rondo. ABABA is another way we might organize our rondo. Here, our alternating section is repeated. Both of the B sections are often in different contrasting keys, and so our two Bs might feature similar motivic material, but feature different key centers to give us a little bit of harmonic variety. Our A sections, again, frequently in the tonic key. A more complex rondo form might be a 7-part rondo, A, B, A, C, A, B, A. There you go, a nice mirrored form for you. In a form like this, each of our A's are typically in the key of the tonic, while the first B and C are again in different contrasting keys. In this long form rondo, many times the final statement of B will be in the tonic key, and so our musical progression would be an initial idea in the tonic, a contrasting B in a new harmonic area, a return to A in the tonic, a new contrasting C in a new contrasting harmonic area, and then a return to tonic through the final ABA, all in the tonic key. This is an orientation of a 7-part rondo that isn't too unusual. This is something we might expect to see. These are all simple and frequently found versions, but of course we can imagine other arrangements as well, and so there can be more complex rondos that have different kinds of returns, different sections, different repeat patterns. They also might have different harmonic arrangements as well. But remember, the key characteristic for a rondo is the frequent return to that A section. This is the defining feature of a rondo. And so how the contrasting sections work might vary a little bit more. The fact that we keep coming back to A, however, is what's going to make us analyze this form as a rondo. There are lots of rondos out there. Again, ends of symphonies. I strongly encourage listening to some of these forms and listening for that harmonic and thematic return to A over and over and over again. This is one of the defining hallmarks of the form. With that, we'll move forward to the other topic of our video today, which is sonata form. I have to say I'm a little nervous even talking about sonata form in a video like this because it is such a rich and deep topic in Western common practice music. Sonata form is one of the crown jewels of common practice music. Many of the most beloved pieces of music in Western common practice music are constructed in this form, and part of the beauty of it is its flexibility. Its ability to be to be used in short movements, in long movements, in simple ways, and in complex ways. It has a real flexibility that rewards your familiarity with the form and its music. Here, we're just going to give a basic outline of the structure and talk about the different sections, what we can expect common to all these very, very different sonata forms we'll encounter in our musical lifetimes. Sonata form is a dramatic form. It's a developmental form that has 3 main sections. And I like to summarize these sections in a simple way. The first section is called the exposition. And in the exposition, our main musical goal is to introduce conflicting musical materials. Okay? We introduce a conflict. In the second section, the development section, we develop and we enhance the conflict between those initial materials. We take that conflict and we build it up. In the third and final section, the recapitulation section, we resolve the conflict. That's it. That's the basic outline of most sonata forms. And this is why I like to describe it as a dramatic form. We introduce a conflict. We intensify that conflict. We resolve that conflict. Well, now, what that conflict is will vary from sonata form to sonata form, and so the conflicts between these materials can take a lot of different forms. But harmonic conflict between different key areas, and motivic conflict between different themes and motives are certainly among the most frequent things we'll encounter. It's very difficult to find a sonata form that does not use contrasting keys in its exposition section. Sonata forms are frequently encountered in the first movement of multi-movement works, like symphonies or instrumental sonatas or string quartets, and of course they can show up in lots of other places. And please don't let this single movement form confuse you with the usage of sonata for a multi-movement work for solo instrument or solo instrument with piano, right? Beethoven's piano sonatas are 3 or 4 movement forms. One of those movements may be in single movement sonata form. It's confusing usage, but we're stuck with it. And so just be careful. This term, sonata form, refers to a single movement. I want to talk about each of the sections of a sonata form in a little bit more detail. The exposition section comes first, and as we explained, the exposition presents the conflicting material for the piece. The primary conflict for most sonata forms is a harmonic conflict, and most expositions are going to present musical material in 2 conflicting keys. These can be any 2, though the most common relationships would be 1 and 5 in major, or 1 and 3, the relative major, in a minor key. These conflicting key areas typically feature contrasting motivic material as well, and so there will be a theme associated or motives associated with the first harmonic area, and there will be a motive or themes associated with the second harmonic area. A typical exposition we might break up into a couple of pieces. We expect to find a first key area / thematic area, a stable presentation of our first key with its motives. We typically get some nice cadences to establish this key as home base so that there's a clear tonic for our piece. After that, we expect some transitional material that will serve to modulate us to a new key area. This might be new motivic material, or it might be based on material from the first key area / theme area. After we modulate, we will have our second key area. Here, we'll have, again, some cadences that establish this new key as an alternative harmonic center to our tonic, and we'll also have some themes / motives that are going to be showing up here, again, to establish an alternative, something different from that first key and theme area. Our exposition might end here, and we might move straight to the development. Alternately, we might have some closing material, typically just cadential material that serves to give a sense of closure and strong finish to this section, or transitional material that might serve to modulate us should our exposition begin in a new key. There are, of course, variants that we can find on this. We can find more theme areas and more key areas in very large and complex sonata forms. But this is a nice foundation, a nice skeleton for what we can expect. 2 contrasting key areas that have typically contrasting thematic content, and some transitional material that moves between them, and probably some closing or cadential material that wraps them up. This typically will push us right towards our second section, the development section. The role of the development is to intensify the conflict that was introduced in the exposition. Our development typically focuses on the material that we heard in the exposition. Most sonata forms do not introduce new material during the development. That doesn't mean it never happens, but it just means that we should expect to see thematic material from the exposition showing up again and again and again here in the development. The development section can look very different from piece to piece. It doesn't quite have a formula like first key area, second key area in the way that our expositions typically do. However, there are some elements that are encountered frequently enough that I feel like I should bring them up here. Harmonically, we expect a little bit more variety and a little bit more instability. Modulations to distant keys that are far away from our original tonic, are pretty common. Sequential chord progressions are another very common way to introduce harmonic conflict, where we have a pattern that's repeated and repeated and we're not quite sure where the sequence will take us. This is something we'll see a lot. A lack of strong cadences is another feature of many development sections. Oftentimes we will have a lack of perfect authentic cadences, we'll have more half cadences or other weak cadences to reflect the fact that we are in a harmonically unstable place. Motivically, we expect treatment of our initial ideas, but we expect to see them in some new ways. Fragmentation of earlier motives is a very common process. If we had an initial melody that was 8 bars long, we might see a focus on the first 2 measures, or the last 2 measures, taking a tiny bit of that melody and spinning it out over a sequence, or developing it into a new form based on that small set of it. We might see new combinations of motives as well. We might see material from a transition paired with a material from the second area, or different connections between motives that were not paired together initially. Additionally, we'll also see sequential treatment of our motives as well. Sequence here where we'll have a motive, perhaps a fragment of a motive, that's repeated over and over at different pitch levels, again adding to the uncertainty as to where we might land. As we wrap up a development section, regardless of what happened, we very, very frequently will end back in our original key with a half cadence. Our development ending on that half cadence to prepare the return of the tonic is one of the most common things we'll see across sonata forms, and so that's something we should expect to see. This is our development section. Lots of different techniques that we could encounter, all serving the goal of intensifying the harmonic and motivic conflicts that we found in the exposition. Let's get to the end. The sonata form finishes with the recapitulation section. The role of the recap is to resolve the conflict that was established in the earlier sections. We introduced that conflict in the exposition, we heightened it in the development. Here, we settle everything up. The recapitulation is frequently organized in a way that's very similar to the exposition, with returns of our first and second harmonic/thematic areas. We'll typically see both of those things come back, but the big difference here in the recap is that in most of our sonata forms, any material that we've heard that was not yet stated in the tonic key will be heard in the key of the tonic. That means that when we get to our second key area, the place where we originally had a modulation, we will not have one here. Here, we will have a transition section that stays in the same key. That transition will just turn us around and keep us in the tonic. We'll hear our first theme and key area in the key of the tonic, and then we'll also hear our second key and theme area in the key of the tonic again. We remove that harmonic conflict that was at the core of our piece here in the recapitulation. We settle things up in the key of the tonic. While there are often some chromatic diversions, the recap tends to be the most harmonically stable of the three sections. Many composers can't resist throwing a little bit of spice in here, but we typically don't see big modulations or big twists this late in the game. When the recap comes, we expect harmonic matters to be settled. Again, we can see some variety in this. More adventurous sonata forms will do more with the recap to make it a little bit more dramatic, but the simplest recapitulations tend to look very much like the exposition, except without any more modulations. That's the end of most of our sonata forms. The end of most of our sonata forms, but not all of our sonata forms. Let's talk very briefly, and then we'll finish, about some formal additions. Two sections that we will encounter in many works using sonata forms, and honestly works in any form. Introduction sections and coda sections. We find these very, very frequently in any piece of music, and so it's good to just talk about some of the basics. And I'm going to talk about them here in the context of sonata forms, but they can be found, again, introductions and codas to our rondo forms, to our ternary forms, to our binary forms, to most of our forms. Introductions occur before the exposition begins. They occur at the very, very beginning of the piece, before the beginning, in fact. Introductions serve a simple purpose. They often establish a mood and a harmonic center for a work. They sort of get things set up, give us a little warm-up before we get into the body of a piece of music. They're often, but not always, set in a slower tempo. Many of our introductions are slow, especially the longer ones, before a faster main piece. Our introductions can be very short. We think of the Eroica Symphony, where we just have two hammer-stroke chords before the initial theme comes in, a very brief introduction before our main theme. Or they can be quite long with their own themes and harmonic motives. We think of Schubert's great C major symphony with its vast introduction before the main exposition begins. Introductions get us set up before the exposition. The opposite of the introduction is, of course, the coda section. The coda section is the closing section that occurs after a recapitulation's final cadence. The function of the coda is similar to that of the introduction. It helps prolong a cadence and the closing material for a work. It helps give a stronger sense of finality to a work. Coda sections typically don't feature dramatic harmonic changes or melodic changes. They just have a little bit of stretching out to sort of give a nice strong period to the end of our sonata form sentence, so to speak. When you're analyzing a passage of music and you're trying to decide whether you want to analyze it as an introduction or as a coda at the end of a piece, one rule of thumb you might use is to imagine eliminating that passage of music from the form. If you can eliminate the passage and you don't interfere with either the establishment or the resolution of the tonal and melodic conflicts, then there's a good chance that it might belong to one of these formal additions. If you can get rid of it and not mess up the overall structure of the piece, then it might be an introduction or a coda. If, however, it is an integral part, if it states perhaps an important theme that plays throughout the exposition and development and recap, then you probably don't want to analyze it as part of an introduction. If it's that formally integral, you probably want to analyze it as a part of the main form, a part of the exposition. That's all for today. This video talked about the basics behind two frequently encountered large forms in common practice music, Rondo form and Sonata form. I strongly encourage listening to music in these forms and listening for the sections that we've talked about. The best way to become familiar with these forms is to listen to them and to play them and to spend some time with them. The more works you hear in these forms, the easier it becomes to quickly recognize the way the sections are divided up and the sorts of processes that we expect to hear. If you have questions, please do let me know. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.